Hey, SBC 209. This is our lecture on Chapter 6, okay, the interpersonal communication process. Seems a little weird that we're taking a course called Interpersonal Communication and the textbook doesn't get to it until Chapter 6, but hey, it is what it is. We're going to move ahead. All right, so let's talk about a couple of reasons. First, I'll start off with the very most basic question about interpersonal communications. Why do we communicate with other people? Okay? There has to be. I mean, we do everything for a reason. All our actions are motivated by something. So let's talk about why we even do communications. Well, the first reason we communicate is to define our relationships. Okay? Now, a lot of times we're used to, in the movies and every rom-com, every romantic comedy movie in the world has that scene in it where they go, honey, we need to talk, and that's never going to wind up good, but in addition to, where is our relationship going, in every movie, all those things, I think, or if you're a fan of Friends from 25 years ago, we were on a break, okay? We use communication and interpersonal communication in order to define our relationships. Not only define our relationships romantically, but we also use it to, explicitly. I had somebody look at me a couple of years ago. They looked at me and said, so what, are we friends now? Because we had been sort of competing colleagues. That person ran one team or one branch, I ran another branch, and we'd been competing for resources. And what I had been trying to do for the better part of 6 to 7 months was to work together so that we could share resources. Finally, that began to work. Then after a while, we began to realize we weren't arguing with each other, and we're talking about arguing patterns and conflict patterns. And so finally, after a particularly good string where we were winning a lot of fights, this person just looked at me and said, what, I guess we're friends now or something. Okay, which sort of said we're no longer adversaries. We can now rely on each other to work as in complement. Just this week, I had to look at a student here at Aiken Technical College and say to them, hey, listen, you need to understand, we're not colleagues. I'm the instructor, you're the student, I'm the one that gets to define, the appropriate behaviors for my classroom. Okay? Was that kind of brutal and kind of harsh? Yeah. But that person needed to understand the nature of our relationship. So the first reason why we communicate is we do it to define relationship. The author of our textbook calls it the DRT, the Define the Relationship Talk. That is a little bit more flippant. There are professional ones where you'll just sit there and again, I've had professional conversations where in the military, we actually have, it's written in an operations order exactly what everybody's relationship is. And I'll pick them up and I say, hey, if you've read the op ord, I'm the supported command. You have to give me what I asked for. Okay, so we define our relationships through communication. We communicate to gain compliance. Now, in gaining compliance, what we're asking is, oftentimes it starts with can you, and finishes with something I want you to do for me. Can you help me move on Saturday? Could you get your car out of the way? Can you make dinner? Can you loan me $20? Can you pick up your dog? What's your dog? My favorite one. Hey, can you pick up what your dog left on my lawn over here? I had that conversation in the last month. Okay. And if you're going to let your dog poop in the lawn, make sure there's not a guy standing right there in the middle of the lawn. Okay, that's just insulting to my intelligence. Okay, so the compliance is to get people to do something we want them to do. Okay, we may communicate to achieve a relationship goal. Okay. Now, there are things like the routine maintenance. Now, some of these things aren't necessarily direct, but if you've been involved in an ongoing relationship, say a spouse or a girlfriend or a significant other, a boyfriend, whatever, gender in relation, however you define the relationship, you may look at them and say, hey, how you doing? Okay? That's one stop is to gain information, and we'll talk about that. Okay, but also it's to establish and maintain the relationship. Okay, you may achieve a relationship goal by celebrating an anniversary. Hey, we've been dating for 6 months, all right, and that's achieving. You're achieving a relationship goal. You may use it to acknowledge a loss. Okay, I'm so sorry to hear your mom died. That achieves a relationship goal. That's not a competitive thing or a zero-sum game. That's just acknowledging that if people in a relationship share information like that. Okay, I acknowledge that my goal is to let you know that I'm feeling your pain. Okay, we can also use it. Things that if you didn't do would redefine the very nature of the relationship. Okay? If your spouse is sick and at home and in bed throwing up, and they started throwing up at 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon when you left for work at 8 o'clock in the morning, if you don't talk to your spouse or call her up, him up, try to contact them, in the 10 hours you were away at work, that could redefine the very nature of your relationship. Okay? I have a colleague. I will not call them a friend. I will call them a colleague. That when his wife went into the hospital to have their child was born at 2 o'clock. 7 o'clock that night, he was in San Antonio at I think it was the AT&T Center at the time, watching the Spurs play the Bulls. His child was 5 hours old. Okay? That redefined the nature of the relationship. Okay? That as much was an action as communication, but in speaking to his wife later on, when he sat there and he said, "Hey, honey, I've still got these tickets for the game tonight. They're playing the Bulls." That would change the nature of their relationship. And it would be years before that relationship recovered from that event. So we do it to achieve relationships. And then we also have something we're going to call self-presentation goals. Now, a self-presentation goal is exactly what it sounds like. It's the way you establish your role in the relationship, okay? I have oftentimes what I call the stern dad mode in the classroom, where if we're giving speeches or we're taking a test and a lot of people do not perform well on the test, I come in and I use a lot of the same tone I use that I would use with my, very, very disappointed. I wanted you guys to work harder. I had great expectations for you guys. And again, it's just a role I play, okay? An attitude I take, a method of communication I use to sort of establish myself in a relationship, okay? There's also sometimes, if you're a good friend, what does a good friend do? How do I demonstrate that I'm a good friend? Okay? And one of the things, again, the relationships we talk about oftentimes aren't just about work, but they're also about, romantic relationships, intimate relationships. So when you're sitting there and you're thinking, what can I say to her to indicate that I want to be more serious about this? I want to be more than just, what do I need to say to her, without coming out and saying, hey, let's get engaged, let's get married. If I don't want to say that because then she might say no, and that would crush me. So how do I communicate that I want to be more of a friend, more than just a friend to her, without coming out and just saying it? Okay? That's your you communicate to meet your self-presentation goals. Okay? Now, we've already talked about language, and we've already talked about language as defined, and we've talked about how language is an explicit set of rules that we all use, and if we didn't have a set of rules, it would be just, grunts and noises, and if we didn't understand how the rules allowed us to put sounds and syllables together to make words, none of us would be able to communicate. Well, interpersonal communications is very similar. All right? Interpersonal communications happens within the confines of a culture. Okay? Happens within the confine of the cultures. Now, the larger culture we exist in many, many ways, defines the nature of our interpersonal communications. Okay? There's any number of cultures that we can talk about. Okay? But we're going to talk specifically about our relationship culture. And we're not talking about how your culture, how Americans, how the Japanese, how Muslims, how Africa, people from West Africa, how they deal. I'm talking, when I say relationship culture, I'm talking about the culture established within an interpersonal relationship. The culture established between two people engaged in a relationship. Okay? And what you're going to see is that we wind up with, first of all, relational storytelling. Sometimes when we're communicating with somebody that we're involved in an interpersonal relationship with, we tell stories. We work through issues by talking about, narratives. We give the issues we want to discuss some sort of narrative framework, a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's plot, there's progression, there's characters. Okay, and a lot of times when we're talking about narrative story, when we're talking about relational storytelling, those characters in that narrative are the two people that are involved in the relationship. But storytelling gives us an avenue for kind of conversing on difficult topics. In other words, instead of coming out and saying, hey, you hurt my feelings yesterday. Okay? You didn't buy me a birthday cake. That hurt my feelings. We start off by saying, hey, do you remember back last year when it was your birthday? And I took you out to dinner and sort of surprised you with that. And I told the waiter, and I'd called ahead and had everything all set up. And you're walking through this narrative. You're telling this story about how much what all you did for their birthday, how that had an impact on them and how positive it felt. Hopefully, before you get to the end of the story, they go, oh, damn it, I didn't buy your birthday cake yesterday. Okay, so hopefully that through storytelling, through narrative, we get to our points. Okay? The next thing we have is idioms. Now, an idiom is some sort of inside meaning that only the two people engaged in the relationship have knowledge of. Okay? Now, a cultural idiom for us, for people who speak English, American dialect English, is just, you don't necessarily have to say somebody's under the weather. You can, or somebody is sick. You can say they're under the weather. And I've actually had friends of mine, acquaintances, colleagues that did not speak English as their primary language would go, "Isn't everyone under the weather?" No, it means they're sick. Well, why does it mean that? I don't know. It's just something we say. Idioms are just something you say within a relationship. Okay? You see somebody and and you'll hear couples do this, you'll hear friends do this, you'll hear colleagues do this. Well, at least he's not old Bob. And you're wondering, who's old Bob? What did old Bob do? Why do I care about old Bob? I'm not working with old Bob. Why are we talking about old Bob? But to the two people involved in that interpersonal relation, old Bob is a very specific character. That's an idiom. It's a shortcut in language that's sort of an inside joke. Okay? We have routines. Okay? Things that give predictability. It can be identified to identify things that are out of the ordinary and can be worrisome. All right? My mother-in-law, God rest her soul, even though she's still alive. My mother-in-law, we were living in England in 1988, 1999. My mother-in-law called us at 4 o'clock in the morning. Bed was by my side of the table. Routines. My mother-in-law never called us. She usually only called us Saturday, middle of the afternoon. Okay? 4 o'clock on a weekday morning, the phone rings by my bed. I roll over, pick the phone up. It's my mother-in-law. I reach over and wake my wife very gently, and I hold the phone up and say, "It's your mother." Okay? And I handed her the phone. My presumption is, based on the premise, my presumption is that my father-in-law does not treat his high blood pressure. And again, this is 20 years ago, and he's still alive, so, he doesn't treat he's got heart disease, he's got high blood pressure, his cholesterol is way out of whack, okay? My presumption is because this phone call was so far out of the routine that my father-in-law had died, okay, or some other family member close to my wife had died. You want to know what the phone call was about? To be honest with you, 19 years later, I don't remember because it was absolutely unimportant. My mother-in-law woke up at midnight in Vermont while we were 5 hours ahead, or she woke up at 11 p.m. and decided she needed to call my wife and talk to her about something like my brother-in-law's birthday and what they were doing for his birthday celebration. Because my mother-in-law has so violated the routines and so went against expectations. My wife just went, "What is wrong with you?" And bam, hung the phone up. Okay? But that routine allowed us to identify when things were out of the ordinary. It allowed us to sort of jump to the conclusion that this is going to be really bad. If you suddenly, it's an old joke where the husband comes home with a big bouquet of flowers and the wife immediately says, "What did you do? This is a routine. You don't routinely bring me flowers. What have you done wrong?" Okay? The next thing we have is rituals. Something that we do in a relationship all the time. A lot of these will be associated with events. We have a Christmas ritual in our house every year on Christmas Eve. We cook big, stupidly large steaks, massive baked potatoes. I don't know why. We just do. We go to our early service at our church, Christmas Eve service at our church, whatever church that happens to be. And then we come home and we watch White Christmas. Okay? The 2 times we weren't able to do those rituals because once I was in Iraq and once I was in Afghanistan, it caused severe relationship issues. Nobody was going to kill themselves. But there was a lot of people that were, we actually put off the first time I deployed, we actually put that ritual off. We put Christmas off until March. We picked the first Saturday after I got back. Friday night, I make these obnoxiously large steaks. I made these huge baked potatoes. We had those. We did not go to church because there was no Christmas Eve service in the middle of March. And we sat around watching White Christmas in the middle of March in San Antonio, Texas, when it was about 95 degrees outside. But that was a ritual that we all embraced and allowed us within our relationships to sort of reaffirm our relationships. So the rituals are oftentimes used to reaffirm the relationship. And then finally, we have rules and norms. Okay? Rules and norms regulate the daily function and can put boundaries on safe communication. Okay? If you have someone you work with in business and you look at them and you suddenly, out of nowhere, you've been working with this person 15 years, and you suddenly look at them and say, "Hey, how's your wife? Are y'all get along okay?" You've never mentioned family to this person once. That is out of the norm. Okay? Our relationship is defined by the fact that we don't talk about anything personal. Let us stick with those rules. Okay? Now, here's something that's going to happen in every relationship. Sooner or later, no matter how we establish our relationship culture, no matter what schemata we use to work within that relationship, no matter how many idioms, routines, rituals, rules, how hard we follow them, sooner or later, we're going to have to deal with conflict. Now, in a lot of cases, the very nature of a relationship will be defined by how the people and the members of that relationship deal with conflict. First things, when do we have conflict? When our goals for the relationship, either short-term or long-term, are not in sync, or not identical, then we begin to have conflict. Okay? When goals, now, they may not be incompatible. They may be perceived to be incompatible. So when goals are perceived to be incompatible, we have conflict. Okay? Conflict is inevitable in all relationships. All right? It's just that how we handle it can define the relationship, and conflict is not always negative. How we manage conflict can build the relationship and be very positive. Okay? Managing conflict effectively by following established cultural norms within the relationship can be a great benefit, not only to in the interpersonal relationship, but also in public relationships. Okay? So if I am, again, we go back to that original conversation I was talking about when I was in competition with another branch within our organization. The fact that we were able to publicly work out a sharing mechanism where we were working together not only built our interpersonal relationship between myself and this colleague, but it also showed that we could manage conflict, and ultimately wound up being a good credit to both of us. So conflict in that case actually advanced us both in the esteem of our bosses, advanced us both in the amount of resources we were getting for our organizations, advanced us both in the influence we had over the organization as a whole. So conflict was actually quite positive. So what we want to do is talk about conflict management. Now, figure 6.1 sets up the style in terms of concern for self and concern for others. Take a look at it. Figure 6.1. Take a look at it. I'm not going to try to write it up here on the board. You can look at it, and we're going to talk. You should read that portion very carefully, because I'm probably going to have some test questions about that. I found it very interesting. I found it a little dry to put in a lecture, but I'm going to tell you, you need to look at it, because you're probably going to see it again at the end of the semester. But figure 6.1 comes up with 5 different conflict management styles. The first one is the one we always think of. Competing. Striving to win. I am in conflict with you. I have to subjugate you. I have to get total victory in this conflict. Okay? We do it all the time. A lot of us think that that's the only way to deal with conflict. Is if we're in conflict, I got to win, because I'm a winner and you're a loser and I'm going to win. Okay? That is someone who is only concerned about themselves and not at all concerned about anybody else. Okay? Is that an effective conflict management strategy? Sure, it can be. Okay? The next one we want to talk about is avoiding. Avoiding conflict. Okay? I just don't want to deal with it. I just don't want to deal with it. Yes, I know Bob is being a jerk, and I know Bob is just incredible. He's being very I can get through the rest of the day without seeing Bob, and then I will deal with it on Monday when we get back to it. I just don't want to deal with it. Okay? It's where you just don't choose to deal with it. Now, a lot of us in our culture, we're Americans, we're used to, come on, let's talk. Let's get this out here. Come on, let's go. Okay? In a lot of other cultures, a lot of Asian cultures, avoidance, where group harmony is the primary thing, avoidance, if you can swallow that conflict and not get into a confrontation over it, that is considered a great asset in your personality. We are completely different. We believe that as an individual, we should go out there and meet the person and have it out with them directly. But in a lot of other cultures where the group harmony is the important thing, that's the person who avoids are people who are highly esteemed. Now, we do have something in our culture that we deal with. We sometimes say, well, yeah, I just don't want to avoid the conflict. I avoid the conflict. But what we wind up doing is we get passive aggressive. Okay? If somebody comes up with a plan that is in opposition to yours, and you don't want to get into a conflict with them in public, you go to the avoidance, but you really can't say, well, yeah, I guess that's one way to go. Hey, are you going to wear that tonight? Really? Okay, that's fine. You look great. Okay? That's all very passive aggressive. Right? Wow, I guess most people wouldn't drive a car that dirty, but you seem very comfortable with it. That's very nice for you. Okay? Passive aggressiveness is a way to avoid conflict. We have accommodation. Where you just sort of go along. Okay? Accommodation is oftentimes seen in our culture as being passive or submissive. It is not necessarily seen as a positive. But accommodation can be a very good strategy for a long-term positive outcome. I may be accommodating you now, but the reason I'm doing that is because in the long run, I'm going to want to get more back from you than I'm giving up today. Okay? We have compromising. Now, a lot of people will come in and say, well, why doesn't everybody compromise? Because it's always a win-win. Okay. Compromising is not hardly ever a win-win. Compromising is oftentimes a you lose. Everybody in a compromise has to give something up. The question is, how much are you going to give up? What are you going to give up? And how important is what you're giving up to you? Okay? And then the last one is collaboration. Okay? Now with collaboration, you need to focus on the fact that you're not trying to win. Okay? You need to be flexible. You need to separate people from the problem. In other words, when somebody comes in and says something that you don't agree with, you don't call them stupid. You focus on calling their idea stupid. No, that's a joke. You don't call their idea stupid. But you don't focus on the person. You focus on the issue and you focus on the solution. And then you ask questions and listen carefully so that you can work together. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, competing is very self-centric and not very good. Avoiding doesn't actually resolve anything. Accommodation is way too passive. Compromising is okay, but I don't want to lose it. Collaboration, no, collaboration is not the best. Avoidance is not the worst. They're all important conflict management styles. It's just you need to focus on which one is working within your relationship culture, okay? And which one do you think within your own self-presentation you want to go with, okay? There have been times when I have competed, not because I wanted to compete, because I thought I needed to stamp that I am willing to compete on my presentation, okay? I don't really care. This is not a hill I want to die on in this organization. But they have to know that I will pick a hill that I will die on. So we're digging a trench here and we're not going anywhere. Okay? But then there have been often times where I have said, hey, listen, we'll give them this one. Okay? I'm not fighting over this. All right? We'll take it. We'll bank it. And then a month from now, when they come back and ask us, we'll try to start this fight again, we will tell them, hey, listen, we're competing now because we accommodated last time. We gave you a win last time. It's our turn. Okay? So your conflict management strategies can shift from from event to event. And again, remember, this all takes place within a relationship culture. All right? Last thing about conflict. Okay? Here's some of the things you want to look for to show that, hey, this isn't just, regular. This is full-on conflict, okay? Look out for serial arguments. Hey, good morning. How are you? What do you mean by that? Why are you always talking to me like that and just throwing cliches out there? I'm not just throwing cliches. Okay. If that's the way you greet someone every morning, you have some serious conflicts you need to deal with. Okay? And serial repeating those arguments is not a conflict management style. That exacerbates conflict. If you think you're in a conflict, don't try one-upping someone. Okay? Well, you think you've got it bad. You should hear what I went through today. Okay? One-upping is something to avoid when you're trying to manage conflict. Then finally, don't mind read. And now, I like the way the author uses the phrase mind read. The other way to say this would be, don't make assumptions. Oh, when he said that, he had to mean this. Well, maybe he didn't. Okay? Maybe you should go ask him. Maybe you should talk to him and find out if that's what they meant. Okay? So don't get in serial arguments that are pointless just for the sake of arguing. Don't try to one-up the person you're in a conflict with. And then don't mind read. Don't work on assumptions. Okay? So, you're in conflict. How do you get out of it? You negotiate your way out of it. Even avoidance, that's not a long-term, that you have to avoid it. So the first thing you want to do in the steps of negotiation is pre-negotiation. Okay? Pre-negotiation is just setting, even some of the basic phrases. Hey, listen, when you come home tonight, before you go to the gym, can we just talk for a couple of minutes? I got some things I want to make sure, some things we can clear up. Hey, Bob, this is Vic. Have you got a couple of minutes so I can come over and talk about some things we need to resolve? Okay? Setting something simple as the time and the place. Defining the scope of the conflict. Okay? Hey, listen, I've noticed that we've been fighting a lot about this. I know that the conversations haven't always been productive. So why don't we get together tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock down in the coffee shop, and then we can sort of have a discussion about how we're going to divide up desk space so that everybody's, you bring your requirements, I'll bring my requirements, we'll see if we can come up with a solution. Okay, I've set the time and the place, and I've sort of defined how we're going to resolve the conflict and how we're going to move forward. Okay? Then we have the opening. And the opening is where we begin to set the tone for the conversation. One of the things that is really important to do is to try to identify common ground. Hey, Bob, I know that we've been, this whole rearrangement thing and the adding the new desk and everything else. I can't have guys sitting in beanbags. You don't want your guys sitting in the hall. So what we need to do is we both want to get as many of our own people, an appropriate number of our own people in a desk. We can both acknowledge that as a reasonable goal. So let's start working on that and sort of start from there. So that's the opening. Then you have your exploration. Exploration is where you begin to exchange information. Okay, Bob, how many people do you have assigned to your branch right now? I mean, on site here, already hired, ready to go to work. 26, okay? I've got 17, okay? But I've got 3 people coming in next week. Do you have anybody coming in the next month, let's say? Okay, you've got 4 people coming in next month, so that brings you up to 30. That brings me up to 21. Okay, that's great. So you're beginning to exchange information during the exploration. You begin to try to look at the entire problem. Okay, You know, Bob, I know you were arguing about these two desks here. Okay, I get that. These two desks here on the plans. I understand that that's a bone of contention. But why don't we try to look at the entire problem to see if there's some creative solutions we come up. Do just sort of a zero start, clean the slate, and start all over and see where we can wind up and see where we can use desk space. Okay? After exploration, you get to bargaining. You get to bargaining. You make proposals. You make concessions. Hey, okay. Basically, we've got the core. We've got of the 45 desks we have. All of them are assigned, but these 6. You need 5. I need 3. How about if you get 4 of those and I get 2 of them? We both have a small loss. But you may have, but I've got more people that are not that are without debt. Yeah, I understand that, but you also have more people, so there's a bigger chance you'll have more empty desks on any given day due to people that are going on business trips, people that are sick. And I've got one person, and I can fit that in within my other 20 people. I'll figure something out. Okay? You begin to, when you bargain, you make proposals. You're gonna have to make concessions. Okay? So just be prepared for that. And then settlement. Settlement is when you formalize the bargaining, the conclusion of the bargaining process. That's where you make agreements. That's where you summarize the results. Settlement is also where you're going to want to document the results in some way so that when you come back, you can all say, hey, listen, we wrote on this map that lays out every desk. You've got, we checked this, and here's the map we agreed on, and you can see here, this says traffic. I run the traffic branch. That's a traffic desk. You need to move your guy out of it. That's what we agreed on, okay? So in settlement, you're going to formalize your agreements, you're going to summarize the results, and then you're probably going to want to document it, okay? So those are the steps of negotiation. And is a way, and is how you resolve conflicts. Again, that fits in within the schema of your style. Somebody that is competing, somebody who's avoiding, all of that would somebody who's collaborating would all fit within this negotiation process. Because if I'm competing and I'm there to win it, when we get into when we get into the negotiation portion, I'm not going to be very accommodating. Okay. So let's talk about what oftentimes drives us into conflict, emotions. There are 2 types of emotions for human beings. One is a primary emotion. A primary emotion is event-related. And a primary emotion has a facial expression that's going to be attached to it. A primary emotion is surprise. Somebody runs in and says, the building's on fire. Fear is a primary emotion. Joy, fear, surprise, anger. And if I say joy, surprise, they all have a facial expression because these are all tied to a recent event. Okay? They happen very fast. They are an initial reaction to something. Okay? When you say that the building's on fire, we have a reaction of shock. Okay? When you hear that a good friend has passed away, been killed in an accident, you feel immediately sorrow. Okay? You may feel shocked. Okay? Now, the next one is a secondary emotion. Now, a secondary emotion has no facial expression. It is not tied to a specific event. and is the result of processed emotions or processing. Okay? We don't feel shame. You know, we may be doing something that later on we look back and we go, oh, geez, I wish I hadn't have done that. Okay? But we have to be able to think about it. We may feel embarrassed immediately, but to feel shame, to feel guilt, to feel hate, to feel pride, to feel love. That's not going to be tied to a single specific event. It can be cultural, it can be experiential over a long period of time. But secondary emotions are not an immediate reaction. Okay? So we have two types of emotions, but something else you also want to be aware of all right, is how we display emotions. The big driver on how we display emotion comes from our culture. Right now, my wife is from Vermont. She's a New Englander. New Englanders are very dour people. They do not laugh a lot. They do not smile a lot. Okay? It was when I first started going up there, people were really taken aback when we'd be at a large gathering and somebody would say something that I found funny and I would let out a big belly laugh. They found that incredibly disconcerting. Okay? In certain cultures, public displays of affection are really, really taboo. It's not something you would ever want to do. In other cultures, hugging, kissing each other on the cheek, if you don't do that, that's considered very taboo. Okay, because that's an insult. Okay, so what among a certain class of English people that I met while I was over there, expressing grief in public was just not something one would do. Well, I'm so sorry about your mom dying. Well, thank you very much for that. I know you must be very upset. If you need some time, please feel free to take that time. I'm fine. Well, no. In America, we want to talk about our emotions. Okay? Yes, I'm very sad. I'm going through loss. She was very close to me. For the English, I'm fine. Thank you very much. Well, no, seriously. I know if you need to go home and help arrange I'm fine. Thank you very much. And that would happen over and over again. It was very disconcerting for the Americans working at our base when we come out and go, do you think Clive's all right? He's been very closed off about his mother dying. I don't know, man. It seems like he's bottling up. And then we bring over one of our English friends and I said, hey, Clive's mom died. And he's not expressing any emotion. And they would look at us and go, what do you want him to do? Do you want him to weep in public? Do you want him to throw himself on the ground and be mortified and overcome with sadness? We're like going, well, I don't know. And then we suddenly realize we sound stupid. That's how they deal with, in their culture, how they deal with grief. Okay? So there's a couple of things about sharing emotions. Sometimes our sharing of emotion, okay, it can be deliberate. It can be accidental. But then there's this thing called an emotional contagion. Okay, and the deliberate is going like, I'm feeling very sad right now. I'm feeling very happy. I feel joy right now. I'm very proud of you. Okay, accidental. Oh! Okay, when something scary happens and we get that primary emotion and we share that unexpectedly. Or when you run up to someone and it's almost accidental where you see something that just causes you to burst out in tears. Now, an emotional contagion, and your author talks about everybody getting a case of the giggles. I will tell you that a more meaningful emotional contagion is where I have been to funerals where everybody is very stoic until that one first person starts crying. And then the whole place just disintegrates into open weeping sobs. That sort of thing where we see those other emotions and those other people experiencing those emotions. And then I don't know if we consciously say it's okay for me to demonstrate that, or if it's some unconscious level we say, I guess it's okay for me to do that, or if their sorrow just adds one more, is the straw that breaks the camel's back on our sorrow, and we eventually just break down ourselves. Okay, there's also, think of the end of an action movie where everybody walks out looking like, they're much more proud, they're much more, ready to go get them and solve the world's problems. All of those are what's called emotional contagions. Okay? Finally, let's talk about one last thing about interpersonal communications. The process. And that's self-disclosure. It's where we talk about ourselves and reveal things about ourselves. Okay? First of all is, why do we do it? Well, there's one theory called social penetration. And we reveal things about ourselves in an interpersonal relation in response to disclosures and to force disclosures from our partners. In other words, social penetration theory says that we do it sort of as a back and forth. I'm going to tell you something about me because either A, you have already told me something about you, or I'm going to tell you something about me, and that's going to force you to say something about me. A lot of times you see that in the early stages of a relationship. You can imagine something on a first date where somebody goes, hey, listen, my biggest fear is that I won't be a successful or meaningful person. And then they just look at you. You've got two choices at that point. Either respond or terminate the relationship. Even if it takes the rest of the dinner to terminate it. If somebody reveals something like that, you have to respond in some way. Even if it's to say, I'm not responding to that, this relationship is not going to survive. Okay? So social penetration theory says that we reveal information in response to someone disclosing something to us, or forcing is a way to force someone to disclose something to us. Then we have social comparison theory. Okay, social comparison theory. Okay? Social comparison theory says we evaluate ourselves pretty much on an ongoing basis in comparison to other people. And a lot of times we disclose information in order to manage that self-perception and comparison. Okay? I'm feeling really bad. I went on an eating binge last night. I hate to do it, but last night, right before I went to bed, knocked back, and I didn't do this. I probably could, and I may have in the past, but I didn't last night. Well, God, I hate myself right now because last night at 11:30, just before I went to bed, I ate an entire bag of Oreos cookies. So we come in and we sit down and we're sort of just, man, last night I knocked out an entire bag of Oreo cookies all at once, all in one sitting at 11:30. Then we wait to see what the other person says. Wow, that sucks, man, because I can't eat carbs after 6 o'clock. If I eat carbs after 6 o'clock, I feel like crap the entire next day. Okay, what does that do? That reinforces our really crappy feelings about ourselves. Oh, God. I'm so weak. God, nobody eats a whole bag of Oreos before going to bed but me. That means I'm the weakest person on the planet. Or, oh, God, I ate an entire bag of Oreos last night right before I went to bed at like 11:30. I feel like crap. And the other person goes, yeah, you know what? We had 5 chocolate-covered, cream-filled Krispy Kreme donuts just sitting on the counter. When my wife got up this morning, there was one left. I ate them. I ate 4 of them. I know how you feel. Suddenly, we compare ourselves favorably. We're like going, well, I'm in an entire bag of Oreos. But that guy ate 4 Dunkin' Donuts or, Krispy Kremes. Okay? We disclose in order to get people to give us information for us to compare ourselves to them. Okay? Now, the other thing to remember about self-disclosure, if you're in a relationship, self-disclosure is always circular. I reveal something, you reveal something. I reveal something in response, you reveal something in return. And it's back and forth and back and forth. It works in a circle. Okay? If it doesn't work that way, the relationship will eventually dissolve. Okay? Because if I'm revealing stuff and it's not coming back from you, I'm going to stop. Okay? At least it will significantly alter the very nature of that relationship. Okay? All right. So that's chapter 6, the interpersonal communication process. Again, I want you to go back and look at figure 6.1 because I like that a lot. Just doing it in this environment online is much better for you to take a look at it. So go back and take a look at it. Chapter 7 next week. We will continue to move forward. Don't forget, you can email me if you have any questions. Don't forget, it's afternoon on Thursday, so your chapter 5 posting should already be up there. Chapter 6, I'll open the discussion boards probably after I post this video, so that'll probably be sometime in the next 24 hours, which will be sometime before Friday the 27th. All right, everybody take care, stay safe, have a good weekend, and we will see you online next week.